without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Carlos Aragon, Vice President with Ipsos's Channel Performance Team. Carlos, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So today we are going to be talking a little bit about the things that Ipsos has learned to date about men's skincare, grooming, beauty, and cosmetic habits. Specifically, we're going to dive into attitudes, motivations, start with a little bit of history, and then dive into a discussion of how brands can help break through to win the hearts, and more importantly, the wallets of male buyers and or their partners. So if we look back at history, it's important to remember that the way that makeup, cosmetics, and skincare are perceived by men in 2022 is not the way it has always been. Going way back to the ancient Egyptians and even the Greeks, makeup was used for both religious and practical purposes. Hose were a male article of clothing in the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance. And then you get into the 20th century, where you have the electric razor, the safety razor, and other items that are invented for the first time. You get into 2022, and we now have sort of a back to the future approach, where there are male brand ambassadors for mainstream brands like CoverGirl. And one of the interesting things that we're seeing here in 2022 is increasing interactions with and promotions of men's skincare and beauty. Not only from social influencers or models, but professional athletes, musicians, people that you may not expect to be doing this with. Christy, over to you.
Thanks, Carlos. Good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to be here today. And I'm sure you're wondering who has the most social interactions. Well, we dug into our Synthesio data set to discover who's generated more than 1 million interactions in the past 12 months. And so we actually got under the hood on this one. And what we learned is that Jackson Wang, a Hong Kong rapper, who's part of the GOT7 band, actually was interviewed by GQ in March of 2022. And he talks about his skincare regimen, which I know all of you are interested to really understand what he does. Fairly simple, except for those days when he's in a shoot. And on those days, he's actually using primer. But mostly he goes out with moisturizer and loads of SPF. That's his morning routine. As you can imagine, he also has an evening ritual. He moisturizes, but then again, he realizes a mask is going to do his skin much better. And so he takes the time to actually do that. So as we progress today, moving to the next slide, what we want to do for you is unveil some really enlightening data from our February 2022 survey that we conducted among 500 males. We'll be providing perspective on motivations and attitudes and perceptions across the generations, which I think will be incredibly illuminating for you. We will showcase for you what really matters, and we'll get into the minds of men very shortly. Over to you, Carlos.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the study that we did in male attitudes towards beauty, skincare, grooming, just to sort of set the stage, the study that we did was among heterosexual men. We wanted to understand what heterosexual men were thinking about when it came to skincare and cosmetics. And what we learned very quickly was men are still pretty reluctant to talk about beauty. There are some shifts in attitude where we see men under 35 who are far more comfortable talking about it than older men. But it's still a touchy subject. When we talk about skincare or grooming, however, attitudes are far more open. The other thing that was sort of an interesting takeaway was that there were some pretty meaningful differences by ethnicity and race. We just grouped the data into Caucasian and non-Caucasian, And what we saw was a pretty stark difference in the non-Caucasian audiences, higher propensity, higher comfort level, and higher willingness to talk about skincare and grooming and use these products than Caucasian men. We don't really have a hypothesis for why that may be that we'd be willing to stand behind, but it was an interesting takeaway for us. A couple of other really interesting things we learned. Men under 35 are much more likely to be current users. I think it was 3 to 1 compared to men over 50. Whereas men over 50, they're not currently using this, but as they get older, they start to realize, okay, maybe I do need to think about taking care of my skin, and their willingness to use it does seem to be increasing.
So now I had mentioned that we are going to get into the minds of men, and there were 2 open-ended questions which we fielded in our survey research. One was related to what are the benefits that men see in adding products to their routine and their regimen. And then also we asked some questions around concerns and barriers. And so what we've done is a thematic analysis to help you really with understanding what's important to men in the category and how you could actually engage with them successfully in order to convert them. If you are sitting there thinking about, I have a brand to market to men, how do I go about doing that? So overarching theme for men under 35, hands down across the verbatims that we analyzed, is that they are seeking better looking skin. And why is that? Because largely they are externally focused. So I'm going to take you through 3 different learnings and then also at the same time talk to you about solutions to address those various benefits. So the first benefit mentioned by many men is make my skin and body look better and help me to make it feel more comfortable. But what they talked about is they're not easily able to navigate the landscape that exists right now. So guide them, help them to get to the product that's going to work best for them. And also importantly, many of the younger guys talked about concerns that they have about the side effects and the harm to their skin. They want actually to know what those ingredients are because they're concerned about breakouts, they're concerned about harshness, they're concerned about harm, allergic reactions. And so in communication to them, be certain to acknowledge, in fact, if you have those ingredients that are going to address some of these concerns that they've raised. The second big learning, big theme is better appearance for my significant other and also to appear more professional in the workplace. But it was really interesting. There were so many different guys who were saying, like, if my girlfriend told me to buy it, I would buy it. And so recognize that there are influencers beyond the males who are contributing to that purchase decision-making process. As a matter of fact, I worked on male brands at P&G for many years, and we wouldn't only talk to men, we absolutely would speak with their significant others because we knew that those significant others were either influencing the men to buy certain products or actually buying the products for the gentlemen themselves. The third bullet here is, and key learning, guys really want that clearer skin. They want to look better because they don't want to be offensive to others. And really, there are a number of men who are out there searching, researching, looking for tutorials, looking for setup tips. And lo and behold, you find a number of different brands actually who are only really still catering to the female in those apps that exist to help them with understanding what's best for them. Also want to just take a moment to mention we have a behavioral data group and we run passive behavioral measurement research where basically there's an app on a device, your laptop, your mobile phone, and we're able to look at all of the searches that men do. We'll say it was a really interesting exercise to analyze everything, all the intimacy of how they interact with their devices. But what we did discover, especially what I want to reinforce here for the men under 35, is when they are searching, they're searching for very specific ingredients. And so that's something that you'll want to keep in mind.
The other thing too, Christy, I think the other thing too that I would say is the reason that I think a lot of these guys are searching online, they don't exactly have peers or role models that they can go to and say, hey, how do I do this? Whereas, women learn how to use makeup from their friends, from their mothers, aunts, other family members. Guys, generally speaking, don't. And so they're using the tools that are available to them, which by and large is the internet, to learn these things.
That's very true. We've found that actually in a variety of different places, new market entry, recognizing that you might not have seniors who have been through this, who can talk to you about, how to navigate product usage. And so role models, influencers are really important. All right, you can click to the next slide, Carlos. So there was one quote that I really wanted to bring forward and share with you, because I'm sure you're wondering what's relevant here. Is it relevant that this product is something that is used by men and women, men alone, neutral, doesn't matter. But many of the guys, especially the 18 to 34-year-olds, did mention that they wouldn't want to add any traditionally feminine products to their routines necessarily. I also saw we have a What the Future Identity magazine, and we had fielded some research for that particular magazine among 1,400 males. And what we learned is 45% of men are open to purchasing cosmetics. 75% of older men actually are open to purchasing skincare products. And what we were able to diagnose is actually about half of those who are cosmetic buyers and 54% of those who are skincare buyers do want a product designed for men. So I think it's important that as you're considering the totality of the proposition, that you'll be marketing to men, that really the male bias is one that you should be leaning into. All right, so let's pivot now, actually, if we can advance to men ages 51 plus. Again, think about the verbatims that we were fortunate to have to analyze what's really important to these men. What are the benefits that they're seeking? I'm going to go clockwise here first. Not unexpectedly, the men 51 plus want to keep their face looking younger, keep it from drying out. It makes them feel better about themselves. That self-care is something that is shown to others. And then professionally and personally, help me to look sharp. Help me to sell the image that I really want to sell. And then importantly, this group is very focused on healthy skin. So keep it healthy as long as possible. And lastly, the key theme which emerged was around vitality to the skin, longevity. There's a realization that the elements can be very harsh to skin. And so there is interest in really using products to help them to address these needs. We also, though, dug in to understand what barriers exist among this older demographic. And what we know to be true is that they mention, and think about the point that we were just making, they don't have a lot of history with this necessarily. So they're thinking this is adding a lot of time. And so the payoff has to be there. It's adding a lot of cost. So a value proposition is going to be really important. And just to reinforce the point, again, a masculine product is actually something that especially this demographic is going to be more interested in. Carlos, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I would add, men over 50 are often married or have partners, they have daughters, sisters, etc. They're all very likely to weigh in on the decision of whether the guy buys skincare products, cosmetics, whatever, and they may even have a role in helping him understand how to use it. So I think we referenced this earlier, but it's important to keep in mind that it's not just a female decision, it's not just a male decision. For men over 50, there's a pretty good chance that it's a joint decision.
That is a really great point. Thanks so much for embellishing perspective on the older demographic. All right, so let's pivot a bit now. I was sharing a deep dive into the verbatims from our survey data. And now actually what we wanted to do was share with you an assessment that we've done using Google Trends and looking at search data over time. What we're showcasing here is actually that the interest over time has more than doubled. The searches for men's skincare, male skincare have actually increased. We've also looked at our Synthesio buzz volume, or the online conversations, and what we see is that has increased as well. We wanted to kind of hone in on like the last 3 months for recency effect, and we in fact continue to see an increase here. To the right, what we are showcasing is very specifically men's cosmetic related conversations have garnered more than 10 million interactions. This is a really hot topic, and I'm sure you're wondering, especially since we have mentioned several times that men and women are both involved in this purchase decision making, who's really having this conversation about male beauty products? So if Carlos would flip to the next slide, I'm going to dig into this now, and I'll draw your attention to the pie chart on the right side. So both men and women are actually contributing to the conversation, but as you can see, almost 6 in 10 women are actually the ones who are having the conversation about men's beauty products, men's usage. What I'm featuring here is a review which I thought really embodied a message that we wanted to deliver to you, which this is an Amazon review by a wife who's purchased this product for her husband. He's starting to talk about the wrinkles that he's getting, and she is concerned for him, and especially because he's saying, it's very weird using these products, and I don't want to use a product that has a girly smell necessarily. And so, he's really, and she's really searching for something that's going to help him deal with the problem at hand. And we're going to be speaking to you later about really how you communicate effectively, especially to appeal to a demographic where ultimately the woman is hearing from the man what the problems are that need to be solved. So we need to ensure that there is crisp communication about the benefit language that appeals both to the men and the women, since they are both involved in the purchase decision process. All right, Carlos, over to you.
All right, so kind of continuing the online conversation, from the Synthesio data, we pulled this back in March, and it was looking at a 12-month period, so April of last year through late March of 2022. The tone and sort of the general context of how men are talking about, and women, how people are talking about men's cosmetics, male skincare, etc. The general tone skewed neutral to positive. There were still about 1 in 5 that were pretty negative, but in general, it was mostly around how do I do this? This is a great idea. Attitudes need to change, things of that sort. The other thing, sort of reinforcing the point that we made earlier, a lot of the topics around men's beauty products, men's skincare, it's about men wanting to look good, men wanting to be more attractive, have better skin, better looking skin. One of the things that we sort of knocked around and not sure that we landed on a final decision was, what is the role of COVID and Zoom, Teams, Skype, these different apps that we're all using when we work remotely? How much of a factor is that? But it was an interesting conversation nonetheless. Again, from the Synthesio data that we pulled, there is a lot of conversations happening around skincare, makeup, even plastic surgery, normalizing the concept of plastic surgery for men. Men get facelifts, men get Botox. I think it used to be somewhat taboo. It is much less so in 2022. And then kind of moving on to the negative side. So there were some really interesting takes on specific people. Alex Rodriguez in 2019, 2020, I can't remember exactly when, launched a blur stick. It is essentially sort of a blemish cream, and the reaction to that was not super positive. Men and women tended to dislike the concept. Now, did they dislike it because it's Alex Rodriguez, or did they dislike it because of the product? I would tend to say that's an Alex Rodriguez specific thing, and certainly the comments that we saw tended to skew in that direction. Conversely, when we look at Asian, Korean, even Chinese conversations around men's beauty, particularly with BTS and a number of other K-pop artists, the reaction is a lot more positive. In Korea specifically and other parts of Asia, the attitude toward men wearing makeup or concealer, things that will enhance their appearance, is far more positive, far more welcoming. Christy, before I dive into the last slide, any thoughts from you on here?
Yeah, I think that I would just advise social has been so illuminating and it is easily accessible to people that they really ought to ensure that they're tapping into this call on steroids, to look at who are the celebrities, who are the influencers, what are people saying. We can do digital personas, which help us to understand who that male target actually is and what his lifestyle is and what's relevant. So recognize, the context around the males and really go into the social environment because we know people are talking about this conversation.
All right, so I'll leave you with one other point, which is, if you are a man who came of age in the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe even the early 90s, this was a pretty stereotypical image of what masculinity is, right? The Marlboro Man and cowboys, and you're supposed to be rugged and whatnot. So, given that this is what we all experienced growing up in the 70s, 80s, and before, is it any surprise that men over 50 are struggling somewhat with beauty and skincare products? And I would add that even for younger men, who didn't necessarily grow up with this image, language is really important. What we saw from our research, what we see from the online conversations, is that grooming, beard care, skin care, hair care, things like that, absolutely everybody recognizes how important they are, and there's generally positive response. But when you move it over into beauty or makeup or cosmetics, that's where you start getting some pushback. And you get men and women who are saying, men who wear makeup are not masculine and things like that. Is it true? Is it going to change? We will see. But I would say that at least for now, this is something just to keep in mind.
Yeah, hey, Carlos,
go ahead.
I want to chime in on this one because we're sharing a lot of perspective from the U.S. marketplace, but what we know to be true is China's in a very different place. Korea's in a very different place. In fact, there's just been a recent surge in China where women 18 to 34 are nudging their men to wear makeup, frankly, because they want their men to look their best, and they're not shy about that. So, I think the other point that we wanted to make sure that we really communicated is we've largely been U.S. centric on this, but patterns are different outside of the U.S., especially for skincare and cosmetics in a marketplace like China.
Yeah, great point, Christy. So I'm going to, Christy and I have shared a lot of information up to this point. There's a lot of good and bad attitudes towards men's skincare, men's beauty. Men are not simple. We recognize the importance of looking good and taking care of our skin, but there are a lot of obstacles to it as well. So we're going to conclude with Christy kicking off the topic about how brands break through and how do we get through to men and women about skincare and cosmetic products. So Christy, over to you.
All right, thanks, Carlos. So we actually connected with our experts in the Behavioral Science Center of Excellence to provide some perspective for you on how to drive habit adoption. I wouldn't say you should go so far as dude fluid in a beer can or blush in a gun necessarily, but I do want to provide some perspective on what we know to be true from a behavioral science standpoint on what drives adoption. We would advise that you're focused on the job to be done. So if you have not undertaken any job to be done work yet, that's something that we would ask you to, very seriously consider. And the reason for that is what we know is that goal orientation, especially with guys, goal-oriented approach in naming your products and identifying the benefit language is actually going to help set you up for success for driving those habits, conversion, adoption, and hopefully loyalty to your product as well. And now, Carlos?
Yeah, and we showed some of the products on the previous slide, O'Keeffe's and a few other things. Non-traditional channels might actually be a really good way to go. So Home Depot, Lowe's, Dick's Sporting Goods, Cabela's, places like that have some really interesting brands and some really interesting products that do seem to focus on the jobs, right? The things that they are intended to do. They are not being marketed currently as beauty products, but it is as skincare for chapped lips, cracked hands, very job focused. And some of them, I was laughing a little bit at some of them. Some of them have some pretty interesting and silly names. But I almost feel like you got to take this a little bit with a sense of humor, right? Guys are not entirely comfortable with beauty products and skincare. So, what, if you take it super seriously, maybe that's not the greatest approach. The other thing, forget Home Depot, Lowe's, and any in-store, but online, especially with COVID, the growth of e-commerce was pretty fantastic. And the thing that an online channel offers is privacy. And it allows men, especially men over 50, who are showing the most significant amount of discomfort with this particular product, to buy things, to learn about things online where they're anonymous, or at least they perceive themselves to be anonymous. And I think that's a really important factor to consider. You're going to have a much more difficult time convincing a 55-year-old to go into a Sephora than you are convincing them to go to a website, Amazon or Warpaint or one of these websites that sells these products. I mentioned this before. I'll sort of reinforce it. Gen X, Boomers, even millennials and Gen Z don't really have role models in the use of skincare and cosmetics. So anything that any brand is doing to sell these products requires an element of education. It's not just enough to sell it, but you have to show people how to use it. And that is something that I think a lot of brands have already recognized and are doing. When you go onto Amazon, for example, there are a fair number of videos where for these men's products where they're demonstrating this is how you use face wash, this is how you use a daily moisturizer, this is when you do it, this is how much to apply. All those things are going to be important. Christy, anything else?
Yeah, I just want to reinforce, if you have not done and assessed the landscape of brands that are showing up on Amazon selling their wares, it's really where you need to start. You need to diagnose exactly how they're engaging, the language that they're using, and what the educational materials are, because there are some really smart brands, that understand this insight. And so you can be inspired from them and then also optimize and understand how to engage in an e-commerce environment. All right. Actually, on this topic, I do want to reinforce for you from our passive behavioral measurement. In fact, we know that men, women are searching in Amazon. As they do Google searches, they're doing unbranded searches within the Amazon environment, trying to find information to help them navigate to find the best products that meet their personal needs. And so I wanted to bring to your attention also, what we know to be true is there is a sea of sameness. We've seen this in the store, bricks and mortar, but we're seeing a sea of sameness also in the Amazon environment. So, consider the language, colors that can enable you to differentiate, and also really thoughtfully consider naming, because ultimately they're scanning those products really quickly and they need to understand, what is that product going to deliver? Be straightforward with your language. Recognize also that beauty is not necessarily something that they want to hear. Not that we've got guys running around. There's definitely an evolution that's happening, and there's openness. But do find inspiration from looking at the very specific benefits that are transformed into names that make it very easy for someone to say, okay, I want anti-aging, I get anti-aging with that particular proposition. Carlos, did you want to add anything other than, like, mascara is probably not what you would suggest that be on the shelf?
I generally agree with everything you said. I think the other thing I would add is, even though it kind of gets laughed at today to some degree, Axe body spray got that name for a reason. People did the research, they tested it, and somebody realized that if you name the product Axe, A-X-E, after an axe, that's going to be more appealing to young men than if you name it after a flower, for example. So the SNL video was pretty silly, but it's not completely off base. These things are going through guys' heads, and they're thinking about these things, even if they don't necessarily vocalize it.
Oh, it's funny. I remember years back, actually, when I was responsible for the Old Spice business, and we would have calls with guys, and they would talk about, very analytical, and they would talk about devices or tools, like what tools they would have in their toolkit, basically, and their grooming kit, right? So it's not terribly bizarre, blush and a gun. Well, maybe that's a little bit stretching, but think in terms of different ways that tools are showing up, and if you want to drive masculinity as a message and the narrative, I've walked many stores. In fact, years ago, also, when we were looking at some of the early refill packaging for different products, we went to the AutoZone and we walked the store to look at, the shapes of bottles, the oil products. And so, really think out of the box, think of the extreme here. And also, to that end, would certainly suggest there are men who have embraced cosmetics. When you're planning your qualitatives, reach out to them. That's who you want to talk to, some of your extreme users. So in summing up today, how to win? How do we win with this male beauty shopper? Well, of course, it's very important that one message does not fit all. And so we're going to talk to you about the highlights as it breaks down into the younger demographic and the older demographic. For the younger demographic, as we mentioned, he's interested in enhancing his physical appearance, very external directed, but also keep in mind, he wants that reassurance that your product is not going to harm his skin. And as we've seen, they're very interested in ingredients too. So that ingredient story and bringing that forward is something that will serve you well in your marketing collateral. And then for older men, very much interested in the healthy skin element here and longevity and vitality, that should also be considered as part of your communication. But interestingly, from the barrier insight that we were able to bring forward, there was this element of, they think it may be time consuming. They're not accustomed to this. They don't have the experience, from their fathers necessarily using these products. And so, break it down for them, show them the ways and step by step in the process, but also, where it could be easily integrated into their routine. Think in terms of, from a behavioral science standpoint, habit formation happens with various cues that can lead to rewards. And so really embrace the ability to tap into those natural tendencies that men may have thinking about certain products that can cue them up to realizing that certain products will provide benefits to them. And then lastly, e-com is king, of course. I mean, it's been interesting for me. I've been in the industry several years. I've been monitoring e-com for the beauty and grooming category. And I recall when it was very young, and we would talk to guys about why they might be using the e-com environment, even though they hadn't yet. And it was this anonymity, this privacy. I wouldn't be caught dead in a store aisle buying some of these products. Well, that all goes away in an e-com environment. So you really should be thinking about being digital first. Embrace what we shared with you regarding, don't necessarily call it beauty or cosmetics. And lastly, focus on the job to be done. Clay Christensen and team, and he has many books on jobs to be done that you may have read and been inspired by. Put it into practice. It will serve you well. So Carlos, any recap from a dude perspective?
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. I'll sort of reinforce the point about focusing on the jobs to be done. there are a lot of products that have, beauty balm and mascara, moisturizer, a blush, etc. Those are the names that everybody's familiar with. I have seen products on the market, and I can't remember which one it is, but I pointed one out to you the other day and said, this is concealer. It has a different name, but it is concealer. And it was marketed for men, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but it was a really interesting pivot in avoiding the terms that are potentially going to make men uncomfortable, and just describing this is what it does. It's super simple. I think that's the only thing I wanted to leave folks with.
All right, very cool. So Carlos, we've got a few questions here. So this first one I'm going to direct to you. And the question is, what should current makeup brands do to be more successful?
I think we kind of answered it, frankly, with this last section. I think, if you try and market Sephora or Ulta Beauty to men, Sephora for men, Ulta for men, there's going to be some success, right? But it's going to be limited because they are still very much perceived as women's brands, beauty products, things of that sort. I think what I have seen, anecdotally and certainly in the data as well, is that you kind of have to make a break and pivot over to a more masculine branding and a more masculine set of products. So, as opposed to Ulta for men, maybe you just have a different line of products, or, I think that's probably the best way to do it. The beauty brands know how to produce these products. It's just a matter of branding and pitching them slightly differently. I don't know. Any thoughts from you?
I think that's great. I've actually got a few more questions coming in, so I'm going to read the next question here. This next one is around the B-side principles are really interesting. Do you have any more perspective to share on males and how we can leverage B-side? And so the other principle that I would share is the power of social proof. So we know that there is comfort in the greater collective. And so, guys, not sure whether or not they should be navigating the space. If they see others actually navigating the space, their decision to do so will be actually validated by others. So think in terms of any time you've been searching for a nightclub and, where do you want to go? Where the long lines are, or the restaurant that has the longest line, we're willing to wait. How long? Just because we know, oh, I want that, fear of missing out. And so to the degree that you consider not just having one spokesperson, to represent your brand, but rather think in terms of putting men in context with others and really driving home social proof. I think that could actually be a really great B-side principle that you can own and lean into as your secret weapon. So I've got another question here. If men are uncomfortable wearing makeup, what should retailers do? How do they reach out to that particular audience?
Yeah, I mean, Christy, I think we know and have seen the research and are willing to accept that men are, let's just face it, men are uncomfortable admitting publicly that they're willing to wear makeup or do wear makeup. It's just, we struggle with it. So, I guess my answer would be don't force the issue, right? Instead of trying to convince men to wear makeup, have them wear skincare products, have them wear moisturizer, right? Those don't have the same, men don't have the same hangups towards moisturizer that they do towards makeup. Even if the products are nearly identical, the fact that they use different names and different terms means that the barrier to entry is far lower for moisturizer or skincare products. I think that would be my takeaway.
Do you have any perspective to share actually on hair care or hair appliance tools? This is another question that has come from the chat box here.
I mean, for myself, and I think this is something we talked about before, men tend to be very efficient. My wife has separate shampoo and conditioner and other products that go into her hair. I have an all-in-one. I don't want to use conditioner. I don't want to use multiple products. My son has body wash, right? He's got the same, effectively the same soap, body soap, and hair soap. I still use a bar. So I think that's probably something to keep in mind when we're talking about men. We talked about efficiency and keeping things simple. The same thing is true for any skincare products. You know, most guys are not yet ready to take 15, 20 minutes out of their morning routine to do, you know, 6, 7, 8 different steps in skincare. But you know what? We'll put moisturizer on our face. We'll use a spray because it's easy, it's quick, and you know we know that it's good for our skin.
Carlos, we have a question, interesting so far, interest in more information about the sample. Who were the men that we actually surveyed? And I will say, and then I'll let you talk more about the survey since your team executed that out of the channel performance group, but we do have a point of view paper, which we have uploaded to the webinar site, and we do have some more information about the sample in that particular source as well. But is there anything more you can add right now?
Yeah, I mean, super quick. It was 500 heterosexual men, 18 to 65, Gen Pop. So we balanced the sample to make sure that it was representative of the age distribution and geography of the U.S. And for the final survey, they were also men who were at least open to using skincare, grooming, and similar types of products. So we excluded the men who just said absolutely not, which I think at the end of the day ended up being about a third of the audience in total. So when we're talking about the survey data, we're already talking about guys who are at least neutral, right? They're not a no.
Great. Thank you so much. Actually, that was the last question that we have. And should anybody have further questions post today's session or have interest in speaking with Carlos and myself about this webinar in general, we are more than happy to engage with you. Feel free to reach out to us, first name, last name at ipsos.com. Hope you enjoyed today's webinar. Hope it was enriching, enlightening, and I imagine if you are marketing a male brand to men, you're probably going to be heading to Amazon soon to do a little bit of research. But I hope this was inspiring, and thank you very much for the opportunity to showcase our learnings today. All right, Ellen?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for attending and to Christy and Carlos for today's really great presentation. A link to the recording will be emailed out this week, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, there are some papers in the handout section for you to download today. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.